Fantastic to see you here today at our second workshop, bringing together the PNG STEM curriculum writing team and Australian STEM education experts. My name's Kathy Kirby. I'm the Education Specialist of the PNGAus Partnership Secondary Schools initiative. So just before we start, could I ask you all to turn off your mobile phones now, if you haven't done so already? And I did want to let you know that we're recording the workshop today, and that's so that some of your colleagues who weren't able to be here can have a recording and listen to the findings. And we'll be also distributing the PowerPoint to you as well. So today, I'm based in a very cold Melbourne, Australia, and I'd just like to pay my respects by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we work, live and learn. And I particularly acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and meet with you all today. And I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to invite Mehdi Retta, who's the Coordinator of Secondary Education in the PNGAus Partnership Secondary Schools initiative, to open our gathering today with a prayer. Thank you, Mehdi.
Thank you, Kathy, and good morning, everyone. Let's begin with a word of prayer this morning. Gracious and loving Father, Creator of all that is seen and unseen, we come before your throne of grace this morning and acknowledge your goodness, your grace, your love, and your mercy. We thank you for the air that we breathe and everything that will happen and transpire this morning. We give you all the glory and honor. And Father, we pray and ask that your Spirit will guide us through, lead us through, and impart the knowledge and the wisdom that we need for the sharing that will happen this morning. Father, I pray and commit the men and women that are here this morning before you, and ask God that you will guide us and lead us. Open our eyes of understanding, give us the wisdom to what will be shared this morning. Father, we pray one more time and give the agenda of STEM education one more time into your hands this morning. We seek your wisdom, your knowledge, and your understanding and your guidance and lordship into this chapter as we chat through. Father, we trust that your Holy Spirit will guide us through. Therefore, Father, this morning, let's pray and invite the Holy Spirit, who is our guide, our counselor, and our teacher, to take us through this session. We ask that the same blood of Jesus will seal this meeting and everyone in this room and wherever they are zooming from this morning. Father, this is our humble prayer we ask in the name of Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Mehdi. Really important thoughts to open this session today and to take us forward. What we do know is that STEM education is a priority for all of us around the table today. I wanted to welcome the PNG STEM curriculum writers, led by Dr. Clement Dwayne, and the STEM curriculum experts from the Australian Council of Educational Research, led by Dr. Pauline Taylor-Guy. I also acknowledge our PNGAus partnership staff, Aaron Jr. and Mehdi in Port Moresby, and Jen, Sophie and Emmeline here in Australia with me. This workshop follows on from our first STEM workshop on the 10th of June, and I know that many or even most of you were there. For those that did miss it, we had a chance to gain a deeper understanding of how Australian schools approach STEM and to hear about the new PNG STEM curriculum. At our first workshop, many of you also had the chance to meet our technical advisors from ACER. So the aim of today's workshop is to provide PNG's STEM curriculum writing team with the curriculum review findings from the technical advisors at the Australian Council for Educational Research. And our hope today is that this is our second step in building a collaborative relationship between STEM experts in PNG and Australia, with our common focus on discussing the new, exciting and important PNG STEM curriculum. So this morning, our program will go along these lines. Dr. Pauline Taylor-Guy, Dr. Christy Osborne, Dr. Celia McNeely and Dr. Sharon Every from ACER are going to present their curriculum review findings. Now, after each finding, there'll be opportunities for you to ask questions or make comments or reflections. So we'll have a sort of interactive Q&A as we go along, and Pauline will lead that. And that'll take us through till around about 10:10 or 10:15 at the moment. And we'll ask Dr. Clement to make some observations about the next steps for PNG STEM curriculum development, and then pass over to Aaron O'Shannessy a few minutes before we close, just to make some closing remarks. So that's our program for this morning. Thank you very much for all being here, and looking really forward to hearing what our ACER technical experts have to say. So over to you, Pauline.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that. And I'm going to try my technical expertise again today. I did it all right first time, so I'm hoping that I can do this second time. I'm just going to share my screen now. Are you able to see the same screen that you saw before? Not the presenter view. So I guess I've got lots of screens in front of me. Just have to make sure I've got the right one. So good morning, everyone. And so I'd like to echo Kathy's introduction there. It's a very great pleasure to be here working with you today. And before I start, I think what I'd really like to do is, again, to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we all meet today. And that's always a bit tricky and a bit, we'll look at all the different lands that we're talking about within Australia when we're all based in different places. So for us, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, as I've said. I am actually on Jabberkai land at the moment in beautiful rainforest just above Cairns, so not so far from Papua New Guinea, really, but a beautiful land here of the Jabberkai people. And I would also like to acknowledge the lands on which my colleagues are meeting, the Djurubal people in Brisbane, and those members of the Kulin Nation and Wurundjeri people, for Sharon, who's down there in Melbourne, so alongside, not quite alongside, the Asialink partnership, but close by, reasonably close by there. So thank you for that. None of you would have seen me before in the flesh, if you like, but I have been working with my colleagues in the background on this project for a little while now. So my name's Pauline. I'm the head of the ACER's Centre for School and System Improvement, and I lead our work in this area right across the globe, actually. So we have that kind of global reach. So we've been very excited about working with this project. We love doing curriculum review work. We've been able to bring our knowledge and experience from many different areas of our work to be able to support this. And as you'll know from our technical advisors there, with Christy and Sharon and Celia, 3 of the 6 technical experts who are able to be with us today, very, very passionate about this area of work. So it's lovely to be here. And I just want to say something before we start about the approach. Although this is a curriculum review approach, the way we always approach our work, we're an organisation that's focused on improving learning. So we like this to be a conversation and a review that's builds a shared language and understanding about what quality curriculum looks like based on the evidence and research and our expertise and your expertise that has been gleaned over many decades. So it's a conversation rather than an accountability exercise. And we really would like you to ask questions as we go through. My approach will be just to present a top level overview of the findings. And my colleagues perhaps will be able to speak to particular elements of those, because the findings will provide a reasonably detailed, and some of the findings are common across all of the subjects. So what we'll be talking about today are the findings that are common across all of the subjects, and I really will invite you to engage in dialogue with us and challenge and question, because that's about building that shared language and understanding. And for us to do our job well, we need to have that dialogue as well. Okay, so let's go to the purpose. Oops, got too over. So as I've said, we're hoping that this session will be an opportunity to view and discuss an overview of the curriculum review approach and methodology. So the way in which we've gone about this work, to have a look at some of the review findings, the top level findings that are common across subjects, even though we've got 3 of our subject experts here. This is around the top level findings, but also to be discussing elements of those findings with the review team. Yeah, so it's an opportunity for us to have that substantive conversation and dialogue around this. Okay, so I'll launch in. I promise I will stop talking myself shortly. That's all right. We'll be able to have a conversation. But I thought it would be useful for us to provide a top-level overview of the review methodology. So as I've said, just like you've had so much experience in writing and working with curriculum, so too have the members of the review team. We have decades, I'm getting older and older, so I can say many, many decades of curriculum writing and review now. Some of the work we are currently doing, we are doing a massive amount of pre-service teacher education curriculum and working with the basic education curriculum in Myanmar, a very sort of big and complex project. Many of us have been engaged in many different kinds of curriculum review projects, including with the Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency. So that's the organisation in Australia that accredits higher education institutions. And my colleagues here, and I'm thinking particularly of Celia in this respect, who came to ACER relatively recently from the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority. So we have great expertise. I think if we added up all of that with all of us in our virtual rooms here, it would be many hundreds of years. So we could bring all of that to the table. So I wanted to talk about the review template, and one of the reasons we're just focusing on these elements. You'll see from the review template that's been shared with you, and that will be the written format of the document that we'll send back to you, that we have these are not the only elements that we could have used for curriculum review, but we think they're the major elements that will really support the guiding and writing of a quality curriculum. So they include the syllabus, the curriculum content, learning outcomes, the idea around assessment, and the learning activities. And they're not in the normal order that we do them, but I thought they might be in the order in which it was easier for you to be able to think about your curriculum writing currently. And so for each element in the template, there are some review questions, they're reflective questions. And this idea around curriculum review is to get us to think deeply about how we can construct this curriculum in the best way possible. So it's not about ticking a box saying you've done this or you haven't done that. It's really about saying how. There are lots of how questions to be able to have a dialogue around and a deep reflection around the different elements in the curriculum. And I put just a link here. I can certainly send through some other links around some substantive documents that you might find useful around curriculum development and review. And I put a link there to the ACER curriculum development process, because that's one that's very much in the forefront of our minds in Australia. And I know that it's one that people like Celia were very involved in for some time. So that idea about having a curriculum overview and purpose and the kind of background papers around that. And I know that you have done a lot of thinking and a lot of reflecting about the aspirations for this particular curriculum, but looking at the evidence that sits behind it, that resource is really quite good. So if we're talking about a syllabus, these are the elements that we generally would expect to see or facilitate the writing of really good curriculum. So we have a rationale and aims, and I know that we have had conversations with you and information from our colleagues in Melbourne around an opportunity to talk about that in the last workshop, about the rationale and aims for this particular curriculum, this Year 11 and 12 curriculum. In a syllabus, we'd also expect to see the curriculum organisation, things like the kind of topics that are going to be covered, any strands, and any links to the broader curriculum. And my understanding is that for STEM, we have the different disciplinary areas, but there has been a decision that common themes will be used across the curriculum as the organising device for integration. In a syllabus, we would expect to see typically then a scope and sequence of student learning and the development of knowledge in and across learning areas. And in that syllabus and that scope and sequence, we would expect that to take into account the kind of time allocations that would be put to each different area or each topic. Because when we are very enthusiastic around a curriculum, the temptation is to be all-encompassing around the kinds of things that could happen. And then we have to think about what time is available for actually to be able to deliver that curriculum. So that's always a tension, to be able to get the full scope of what we want to do, but within the time allocations. And importantly, that the curriculum is very attentive to context. So in our work in Myanmar, for example, there's very high aspirations of their teacher education curriculum, but there's also the reality of the context with the amount of resources, technology, expertise that is available across the whole country, not just in, for example, urban areas. And of course, in school-based curriculum, that's really important, that we can't necessarily rely on an even spread of resources that schools can bring to the curriculum or teachers can bring to the curriculum right across the country. So in terms of syllabus development then, sorry, I'm bouncing one screen and not the other. There we go. So typically then, before any content is written, there would be an agreement about the curriculum design and the scope and sequence developed for each subject, and in this case, across the STEM curriculum. And like I said before, why would that happen? Because it maps the knowledge development across the whole program. And it's realistic in terms of time and content allocations, and it clarifies the curriculum design. So this idea of syllabus development is really foundational to supporting us in writing a feasible, quality a curriculum. And so what I've done in the next few slides is I've just mapped out, and I know this is being recorded, so you'll be able to go back and visit this, but just mapped out a typical design and writing sequence for any curriculum. And the reason I'm walking you through this is because these are the kinds of things that we'll be providing feedback around your individual subjects in the review. So a typical design and writing sequence then is the curriculum has a rationale and aims. So I think if you were thinking yourself around the kind of curriculum rationale and aims, you have a very exciting and ambitious curriculum. The aims of your curriculum are to have this wonderful problem-based learning curriculum that is a really high standard of curriculum that integrates local knowledge. I could go on about this for a very long time. It's a wonderful curriculum rationale and aims. The second step in the writing then would be the overall curriculum organisation. What is the big picture of the curriculum organisation? Is it organised in individual subjects? Is it organised with common themes? You notice I'm asking these questions because I actually know some of the answers to those. And you will know some of the answers to those. Importantly, though, the next step is really thinking about what kinds of time allocations do you have for the different discipline areas and across the whole program. So if we are looking at the whole semester, what are the time allocations to each discipline? Let's have a look here then. And then we would use that basis to design a scope and sequence. So a scope and sequence is the knowledge that's to be covered over the whole program in each discipline and actually across disciplines in the case of STEM. Then we'd be looking at what are the learning outcomes for each of the topics of that scope and sequence. What do we want students to learn at different stages in that scope and sequence? And those learning outcomes would be attentive to inclusion, different kinds of inclusion, broad idea of inclusion, but also to the local context. And of course, then we'd also be thinking about assessment. How would students demonstrate? What would we be looking at to demonstrate that students had actually reached those learning outcomes? So the learning outcomes and assessment are very, very closely related. And in fact, learning outcomes can frame the way that assessment is happening. And I'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about learning outcomes. Then we're looking at the content in detail, like what is it that they're going to be learning? What kinds of resources do we need? What kinds of textbooks? What kinds of things do we need to be able to support that content? Then we're thinking about learning activities. That's the how. How are students going to learn? How are they best going to learn? How are they going to learn in a very engaged way to be able to meet the learning outcomes that you have focused on earlier on? And that needs to be attentive to inclusion, local context, and the kind of pedagogical practices that you'll be using. And for your curriculum, you'll be talking about problem-based learning. So there's a quite strong pedagogical focus there already in your aims and ambitions for the curriculum. And then you'll be thinking about your assessment methods and rubrics for that kind of assessment. So that's a very quick overview of what you'd expect in a typical design and writing experience for a curriculum. And what we find is that provides a sort of roadmap. And if we get enthusiastic, which often we do, around various elements of that roadmap, and we get ahead of ourselves, what we'll find a little bit further down the track is maybe we've been overly ambitious in the early stages of the program, and we need to step out that learning in a more considered and mapped out way across the whole of year 11 and year 12 in your context. So I just thought for the next slide, I'd give you an illustration from this is actually from, you can see from the middle science syllabus, from the work we're doing in Myanmar at the moment. And the unit that they're talking about is, say, Introduction to Science. And the subunit, so we have syllabus documents that step all of this out. The subunit is a course overview, and each of the units is divided into lessons, and the lessons are just subtopics. And then you'll see on the right hand side it'll say periods, and the periods is actually the amount of time that is dedicated to each of the lessons. So for this particular topic, there has been an allocation of 1 period, and in Myanmar that is 50 minutes of teaching time. Yeah. So the syllabus steps out the topic, any substrand, the time, but importantly here, this one's got quite a lot of learning outcomes for the 50 minutes of that learning. And this one would be to review the main objectives and content of the curriculum. This is to, came from physics as well, examine where physics strand is located in the basic education curriculum, etc. I don't need to be able to step that out. But it's just to provide an illustration to say that all of these things have to be in our heads at the same time when we're writing our curriculum review. So if I go where we've been working with your curriculum step out, and as I say, we've really enjoyed doing this work. We can see just the massive strengths that are in there, the excitement, the authenticity of the learning. We can see all of that, so it's been lovely to see that. I'll provide some specific comments about that a little bit later. But in relation just to the syllabus scope and sequence, let me have a look here. What we know is that an overall scope and sequence hasn't yet been developed for this curriculum. So it's difficult to see how all of the work is going to be stepped out over years 11 and 12. And like I say, it makes our writing task as curriculum authors much easier if we can step out that scope and sequence so that we don't try and overload the beginning of the curriculum. In our enthusiasm as curriculum authors, we all want to overload the beginning of the curriculum. Yeah. And that's why the second finding is that curriculum content is likely to be too dense if a clear scope and sequence hasn't been developed. So a recommendation that cuts across all the different subjects is that the writing team should collaboratively develop a scope and sequence for the program and for individual subjects, and it should include the topics, because you already have a clear idea about the topics, but the time allocations, how much time are students going to be dedicated to each of the topics within the curriculum, the learning outcomes for each topic. And, you know, some of the learning outcomes that we have there, we can see are really strong and focused. So that's really great. But being able to step those out right across the curriculum, much easier for you guys to write the curriculum if that's in place. So as you're moving forward, it just provides the roadmap and to be able to do the check and balance around time. So I'm going to stop talking as I promised I would there. And I'll do two things. One is I'm going to invite questions, I'd like questions, and then I'm going to also invite my ACER colleagues to engage in any kind of dialogue we're having. So are there any questions? I'm hoping there will be questions. Are there any questions or challenges so we can build a shared understanding around the idea of a scope and sequence and syllabus? You may have already had an experience about it being tricky to write curriculum, to try and fit content into, which you'll have an idea in your head around time as well. You might have found that quite tricky and almost a little bit frustrating as well to want to get a lot of content in to the different curriculum areas. Has that been your experience?
There's a question from this side of the room.
Thank you.
This is Pauline. Thank you, Pauline, for your detailed information as to how we can get into designing our curriculum materials, and especially you touching on the syllabus, which is a policy document supporting our main STEM curriculum policy that is been we are writing basing upon. So I would like to make acknowledge Sagra's input into current curriculum development practices with CDD. I believe you guys are in touch with that. Your syllabus outline that you've just taken us through, we appreciate the comments you are making. The rationale and the aim and organization of the whole document itself into topics or strands, sequence, scope and sequence, time allocation, and of course, the other steps you have listed down. The point that I want, and we also appreciate your findings and the recommendations you are making basically based on the syllabus outline that, or the design that we have used. We took into account the overall scope and sequence. It's not fully out. We are still in the development phase that we are writing still. So we're hoping to get that to the end of it once we master everything. And
Yeah,
I'm talking here from my 14 years writing in the CDD, with CDD, Curriculum Development Division. And we have, not that we are writing from the top of our head, but we already have a kind of a overall view in place. But we are writing so that, because we are writing this for the first time, quite different to what our curriculum that has been written, we are not really fully giving out our scope and sequence as yet. So we appreciate if you could come into some areas where you can be able to guide us as we are still onto this part of writing. Thank you.
That's just, thank you so much for that feedback and the background there. And I think you touched on something very important, which is that syllabus scope and sequence, even when you're writing, it's an iterative process. You go backwards and forwards. You know, you think, well, we'll start writing and then we need to amend our scope and sequence. We need to amend to do that. So our work that we have been doing in the big project that we've been doing in Myanmar has been exactly that. We've had curriculum authors and consultants saying this is what we want it to look like, and then as we're writing, there's a whole piece of work that happens where that syllabus gets and that scope and sequence gets adjusted as we write. So it's a very normal process for that to be adjusted as you go, and so there's no problem around that. It's just an acknowledgement that it's tricky to be able to write curriculum without that bigger roadmap in your head. And we do realize that that roadmap is written as you go along. So I appreciate that. I think at this point, probably call on my colleagues at ACER, because they can talk a little bit about our experience, because they've been curriculum authors too very recently, about so thinking Christy and Celia about that experience of going backwards and forwards between the scope and sequence and refining the syllabus as we go. Christy, would you like to start on that?
Hi, so I'm Christy. I've been working in the Myanmar project. I was looking at the physics curriculum for high school. So that's the part I was doing, and that's also the part I'm looking at here in the PNG project. So the background with the Myanmar work anyway was that there were some fantastic ideas with some great real life applications, and they were really pushing to get a lot of content in, but they became quite obvious as they started moving along that they wanted to cover topics, but it was going to be very surface level with the time commitment that they ended up putting in. So what they ended up doing was having to draw some of that content out. But that was an iterative process. They didn't realize that until partway through the writing, that there just wasn't enough time to practice enough problems and really get some of those physics situations linked up with a real life example that was accessible. These things take time to explain to students. And once they started writing up their actual lesson plans, and that became quite obvious that they needed more time. So they ended up changing their syllabus as they went and moving some things from one year level to the next and so forth, and just figure out too which things to prioritize, like what parts they really need and what parts were just a nice add-on that perhaps they could put into an assignment for students to look at in their own time. So that's what I found in the Myanmar work.
Thanks, Christy. So it's this happens all the time. We know that it's a dilemma, and this is why we're making recommendations that will hopefully be able to support your work and reassure you in that work. Celia, do you have any comment about working on that project or the Myanmar work that relates to syllabus development, or indeed from your ACARA work?
Oh, look, my experience with the Myanmar project was very similar to Christy's. It's a very iterative process. We've had good communication with our colleagues in Myanmar to make those adjustments to the syllabus as we've progressed, and that's really facilitated as Christy identified, where deeper knowledge needs to be unpacked and making sure that there's sufficient time for that to happen. As Pauline mentioned, in the pre-service teacher education, one period is only 50 minutes. And sometimes, as you could see, even in the scope and sequence that Pauline said, there are a lot of learning objectives that they would like to try and unpack, which is just not always feasible. I suppose for the purposes of the review of the Papua New Guinean curriculum, so I've been looking at their biology materials and understanding the context of the school, so how much time students have for some of these themes. I know that in the biology curriculum, the modules are in 3-week blocks, but it's I suppose a more detailed understanding of what this looks like for students in the school context would be useful to know how much opportunity there is to unpack some of the material that's written into the curriculum.
Pauline, Aaron notes that there's a question in his room.
Sorry, Aaron, we're on very small screens here, so we can't see. Aaron, question there, yeah.
Thank you. I'll hand over.
I thought for the research finding that you've done, I just want to ask if you visited the schools to get the feedback about the previous delivery of the curriculum.
I'm not sure I heard that question well, but it was, I'll speak it back to you to see if I heard about that. Is whether we had an opportunity to visit the schools to know the context. Is that right? Have I summarized that right?
Yeah, in PNG, the 6 national high schools that we have delivered the curriculum, maybe get some feedback from them to confirm your findings.
Yeah. That's a really good question. So in the case of Myanmar, I've done a lot of work with in my previous position before I joined ACER I was the head of School of Education at James Cook University, and we have a very strong partnership with the Ministry of Education and with Papua New Guinea because of our proximity. So for our Myanmar work, yes, we did visit. We had the opportunity to visit before the pandemic hit. And of course, they have a military coup at the moment. So even if they hadn't had the pandemic, it would have been a bit of a challenge for us there. So we did have a lot of opportunity. We had some of us, Christy and Celia, didn't have the opportunity to visit Myanmar in the context, but the technical leads of the project had spent some time in Myanmar. And I think this is where the reliance on good communication with our local curriculum consultants and core curriculum consultants is very important. But having said that, we're experienced, I think, in looking at curriculum in different kinds of contexts and really drawing on those local contexts. And that's one of the strengths of the work that you're doing. That came through really, really clearly when we were reviewing these opportunities for authentic learning that draw on local priorities that fit in a global world was something that is a really good strength of the program. So yeah, and we know the challenges of when you have very, very difficult geographies and resourcing across different schools. So yeah, we've so for the Myanmar work, yes, some of us had a lot of opportunity to do that, and where people didn't have the opportunity, we've tried as much as possible in terms of consultation to be able to get that curriculum sharp and localized and relevant. So Christy and Celia have been working to write that curriculum without the opportunity of having of being in the country. So they're actually in the same position you are, but not in that context. So it's been, but they've been doing a great job on that. So we understand the challenges that are there.
And I think just to add from the Australia Awards PNG perspective, at the moment, the scope is limited for this work around remote assessment of the curriculum, not in terms of how it's rolling out into schools as yet.
Yes, that's right.
So that's the scope at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, and certainly that's how we understand the scope. So curriculum implementation is the next step. This is about having a look really at the review and being able to provide some support and ideas about how to strengthen the writing process itself. So that's really great. Sharon, I'm aware that I haven't involved you in that. Did you have any comment about syllabus writing and things like that from your experience?
No, not really. I think I can just agree with what you've been saying so far more than anything, because I think for me, looking at the chemistry document, the time is one of the things that just kept creeping into my mind. And I was probably thinking about it more in terms of the actual practice, you know, like how would I actually do this if I was teaching this? And I'd be thinking, oh gosh, you know, I'm really struggling to get the time across here, and how's this actually going to work and fit in? So that was one of the more things that I was thinking about as I was reading through as well. So I can only agree with you.
Thank you so much. And I'm Sharon, and I'm mindful of time, and you know, we have it's never enough time. We spend a lot of time consulting with colleagues when we're giving feedback, and there's never enough time to do that. So I'd just like to move on to curriculum content, if that's okay. And, you know, you can certainly ask us questions and email us questions, and we're happy to answer those. As I say, you'll get more detailed feedback, written feedback, which would be good. But when we're looking at curriculum content, we're looking at whether in any curriculum that we would be reviewing, is it appropriate and achievable for Year 11 Semester 2 in relation to the scope and sequence of the subject in Years 11 and 12. Now, we're aware that if you haven't got a fully scoped scope and sequence, that's a difficult judgment that you're going to be able to make. But you can have a little bit of an idea. Our work in Myanmar, again, was because they were moving from a 2-year teacher education program to a 4-year teacher education program, there was a strong tendency to try and load up the first years of the program rather than shifting things around. So that's what Christy was talking about there, about really trying not to be doing too much right at the beginning and really trying to see the curriculum as it unfolds. And then the second question in this area on the review template is, how does the content link to prior knowledge and enable deep engagement? And this is where we check that the curriculum reflects the appropriate starting point for learning based on students' prior experiences and encourages deep engagement in the new learning. So this is about starting points for learning. And certainly when we're looking at the findings for that, we're aware of the bridging program that has happened between the end of the grade 10 curriculum and the new STEM curriculum. Sorry, just put that up as inclusion. But you know, how does it link to prior knowledge? So one of the things I guess to be mindful of as curriculum authors is, you know, are we expecting all students to go? Obviously, we are to go through the bridging program, but even with the bridging program, are we assuming that all students will have met the requirements of the grade 10 curriculum before they go in? So that's a little bit of a backward look. And that's just raising that. We can't comment specifically on that because we don't have enough detail around it, but that's just a reflective question, I guess, or some reflective questions too, for you to think about with a curriculum there. 2, 3, the question there is, how is the, that should say content, sorry, how is the content reflective of considerations of inclusion and local context and knowledge? And we tend to use the UNESCO definition of inclusion, which is very, very broad. It's a very broad idea. So it's inclusion, you know, which is emphasis on groups of students who might be at risk, removal of barriers for students, and about the presence, participation, and achievement of all students. So I just wanted to put that out there, which is about the considerations of inclusion. I think one of the comments you might get in detail, there's quite a strong emphasis in the curriculum that you're developing on gender as one element of a broader inclusive practice. So we know that the strength probably there is in considerations of gender, but we would be asking the question of all curriculum content, how is it more broadly inclusive beyond just simply gender? Not that that's simple, but beyond simply gender. So I'll just put that statement up there, hopefully to be able to guide your reflections as you're writing curriculum, to be considerate of those different elements about inclusion. So just some, just some findings then here. We can see huge strengths across the curriculum, and with its your writing is attentive to local context, to authenticity, and opportunities for deep engagement. It's an exciting curriculum. A problem-based learning curriculum is an exciting curriculum that can draw on local contexts. We did think that content in some subjects seems too much for the time that's been allocated, and this is a common thing when we're writing curriculum, to try and put our ambition against the different time allocations. And we recognise that there's intent to have a common focus across subjects rather than use STEM as a separate construct. And what we would say is this makes a scope and sequence within each subject even more important to be able to have there. So our recommendations are a little bit the same as before, which you do, as authors, you try and develop as clear a scope and sequence as you can for each subject and the curriculum as a whole, and really make sure that you've got those time allocations in there to kind of rein in the ambition. And consider how, and this relates to Christy's comment and Celia's comment there, how content can be pared back to focus on deep learning. And again, the scope and sequence will help with that. So again, some questions or observations from curriculum authors. Stop talking again.
Just a comment on the, especially on chemistry. We've been accused for being lightweight, providing very low or little content. So that was our accusation, but I'm finding it rather quite, you mentioned it to the contrary, that it seems to be quite heavy.
That statement is exactly the dilemma that we've been working with our Myanmar colleagues, where disciplinary experts are very, very concerned that the curriculum is very rigorous. It has the highest levels of disciplinary knowledge, with the idea that if you're having problem-based learning in particular, it can't be too content heavy. So I think it's that balance. We can see the ambition is that very, very deep and sophisticated disciplinary knowledge. We would be advocating for deep learning rather than volume of learning, and how you can pare back and focus on it. So that's a great comment, and one that is a dilemma where you're having other reviewers reviewing your curriculum. Again, I'd just like to draw on my ACER colleagues from their very recent lived experience in this, working with Myanmar national disciplinary experts who have been challenging. The ambition of the Myanmar curriculum was to have a student-centered curriculum, one that was less teacher-directed, less didactic and content-led, but it's led to those tensions, I think, and trying to resolve those. So Christy, I'm going to start with you again, only because you sit underneath me on the screen, and that makes it easier for me to work out.
Yeah, so definitely when they started out with their curriculum, they wanted to cover a lot of different content. Some of the content that they would like to cover wouldn't have even been covered, for example, in other countries in those year levels, but they really wanted to prep these guys for universities. So they were trying to put in as much content as possible. Also with a lot of hands-on examples and problems to solve in class. And unfortunately, because of time, you can't do all the hands-on examples and the pracs and the problem solving in class and a lot of new different content. So what ended up happening was they focused on just a couple of different pieces of content that they felt strongly that students needed, and they went deep on those. So they really focused on getting those hands-on examples and the practicals, and the content that they felt was critically essential, because that way they could actually do it at a deep level and get practice and apply it to real life situations, rather than touching on a wide range of content, but at a very surface level where there just wasn't the time to do even example problems in class. So they ended up narrowing it down quite a lot, but what they ended up keeping, they did quite deeply. And the skills they learnt through that, they could then easily apply to a higher level topic. when that topic came up at university. So that's how they tried to do it in the Myanmar curriculum for physics.
Thanks, Christy. And Celia.
Yeah, my experience is obviously very paralleled, and it became very much less about the content knowledge, but the development of STEM thinking, really. So those processes of problem solving, critical thinking, and then that puts students in a position where, regardless of the content, they've got the skills that are translatable to real life problems, to multiple situations that they might encounter across many different disciplines. And they have those cognitive processes that enable them not to be overwhelmed by the fact that it's new content, but they have the ability to think critically about a new situation and apply their knowledge. So there was a real shift in focus from content to much more, and facilitating teachers, providing them with the pedagogical approaches to facilitate that development and scaffold students in their learning of STEM thinking in the classroom. So, I mean, again, I understand the comments about, you know, we have a certain amount of content to cover. It is much more straightforward to bring in new content when you've developed the ability of students to have these STEM thinking processes, design thinking, critical thinking skills, and then the new content becomes much less overwhelming, both from a teaching and a learning perspective.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And the reason why we include a lot of activities and a bit more heavy on the content is because we don't know the resources that exist at the school level. So we give a lot of flexibility in terms of teachers to choose and pick whatever they want, and they can deliver it depending on their expertise. Because we have teachers that are qualified in terms of the content, but may not have the ability to, they don't have the teaching ability. And then you have teachers that are trained to teach, but don't have the content to the background to deliver those content. So those are the issues that exist at the local level. But we have divided them into the thematic areas. So in this way, students can reason. And I like the way you said it, because it's not so much about the content, as long as they can think in terms of STEM and how to iterate and how to devise, how to improvise and solve different situations. So we divide them into the thematic areas. So in this way, there's a concentrated effort in that particular block of time right across a different what we call the phyla or the different subject matter. So they can understand the issues from different perspective and be able to adapt, adjust, and then utilize those different skills at the same time in that block of time to solve any given problem. So those were the considerations going into developing this curriculum.
I'm thinking that one of the things we can do with the with our review, in the written review, is actually really strengthen that part of our review to really agree with you, I guess, on the approach that you've taken, and perhaps to deflect somewhat any criticism about content, the amount of content, because we would be absolutely in agreement with you around that quality curriculum is around developing those thinking and cognitive abilities, not the content per se. And I think, so that's one of the things I've made a little note here to make sure that we have that really strong in actually the final written statement back again. Kathy, I'm conscious that we started late and that we're at 4 minutes past 10 now. How would you like us to proceed? Would you like us to proceed and run over time, or how are you wanting us to deal with this today?
Great, Pauline. Look, I just had a short consultation with Aaron about this, and our PNG STEM writing team are able to stay longer, and we weren't sure about your time constraints, but I'd like to suggest that I know that you've got 2 more key points that you want to make in the presentation. So if we end this presentation and question section by 10:30, that will give us time to go through those. And then we'll ask Dr. Clement to make some observations. And I understand from Aaron that Mr. Benny Rayapan from the National Department of Education is with us today, and he'll make some closing remarks. So we'll be aiming to finish completely around about 10:45, 10:50 at the outside. So if that's okay with you, that's my proposed plan.
That's fine from my perspective. I'm not sure about the commitments of my my ACER colleagues there, because I know how flat-strapped they are at the moment to be doing things. But certainly all right from my point of view. But please excuse any of us who might have to dip out for various different things that they are doing. So that's all right, Kathy. I will certainly be online for the whole period of time. But it might be that others might have to dip out.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And I just want to ask Sharon. Sharon, did you have any comments around that as well from your experience? I know that Christy and Celia have been talking about that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it in terms of allowing enough time to develop the basic skills that they need. And this, I mean, you're bringing up chemistry, that's why I was thinking about it. You know, the lab skills, the analytical skills that they need, so they can really get that deep engagement of your really good, authentic context that you have. And I think that's a really important aspect. Like, the time that you've given is great in terms of if that's all that you needed to do. But if you need to actually build those skills up into so that they can get that deep connection to those contexts, then they need that time to learn it as well. So that's where I was coming from and thinking about.
Thanks, Sharon. And yeah, as I say, I've made a note there that in our written report to emphasise these points, because I think it'll kind of strengthen your position and resilience if you're, and we've certainly experienced that with discipline experts within Myanmar. And it's that, you know, this is a different way of doing curriculum. It's a different way. So some things will not be done in the same way, and that's that change process, which is, you know, trying to build that shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve there. Okay, well, I better press on. So another element we have a look at is learning outcomes. So how are the learning outcomes reflective of the time and scope for Year 11 Semester 2 stage of the syllabus? And I just wanted to raise here how we review these elements. So, learning outcomes should be by topic. They should include an action verb. So we always recommend that you're using Bloom's action verbs, because it focuses attention on what are observable practices. So we don't have words like understand in the actual verbs. You can see under 2 there, it says understand. They're things like summarize, interpret, classify, because it gets a specificity on the learning outcome. And a really good way of thinking about learning outcomes is that they should also have a standard and a condition. And the standard is like, so, okay, you're expecting students to solve maybe a problem. What is the standard that you would expect that they would do that? What kind of standard, and what is the condition of how they would do that? And I provided an example here with the findings and recommendations. I thought I had. Oh yeah, I have. Yeah. So we know that we can see that the learning outcomes that you've written in the syllabus do enable deep engagement. They're really connected to authentic work. They have great action verbs. We can see that they've got great action verbs. And can I say that is extraordinarily rare? When we're doing curriculum review, even in Australia with curriculum review, that element consistently isn't there. I mean, we have to do some capacity building work around that, but we can see that you have great action verbs there. What's less obvious is the standard and condition. So what's less obvious is what kind of standard are you expecting students to do to be able to demonstrate this learning, and the condition of that learning. So I've given an example from the syllabus there, and I've taken it from the physics because I've been in conversation with Christy around this. So explain how medical diagnosis can be performed using a variety of techniques in the medical physics theme. So just some questions. That explanation, how would you imagine that explanation to occur? Would it be a written explanation? Would it be an oral explanation? Would it be a peer explanation? And what would a successful explanation look like? So if we can really hone those learning outcomes to be thinking about standard and condition, that gives us an opportunity to be able to map across the curriculum your different assessment types, for example. And we've got something to say about formative assessment, because there are great opportunities for that through this curriculum. So that was just one example that's, real commendation around your action verbs. The action verbs allow you, if you're mapping that against Bloom's action verb taxonomy there, to really think about higher order thinking as well. That are your learning outcomes all located at the lower ends of Bloom's? Are there opportunities for evaluating and innovating, creating? So our recommendations would be, where you can, to sharpen those learning outcomes. And that is also done iteratively as you're developing the learning activities. To help alignment, particularly with formative assessment, we'll talk about that in a moment, and to ensure that higher order thinking outcomes are included as well. Even if you're at the beginning of a curriculum, you're still able to do that kind of higher order thinking kind of idea around those verbs. But great commendation around, enabling deep engagement and also having those good action verbs. So I'll have a stop for questions about learning outcomes. And I appreciate that we're rushing slightly now, so I can slow down a little bit because Kathy's given me permission to do that. So slow down a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, Pauline. So let's see if there's comments here.
Yeah, thank you. Any comments about learning outcomes?
We had a list of action verbs, also and don't also. And the thanks to Sabina, who insisted on those things. So that's good. At least I'll positive highlight it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. So again, recommendations is, and as I say, it is done iteratively. You just go backwards and forwards as you're refining the way that you're thinking about what the students are going to be learning, because when you get the learning outcomes right, then that actually drives the learning activities too. So you get the whole alignment happening. And these things don't happen as separate pieces of work. They happen and they evolve as you're writing the curriculum. So that's great. Any more questions? Yeah.
One comment from this side of the room.
Thank you. We appreciate your recommendation for our learning outcomes. Okay, we are now terming in our STEM curriculum the learning outcomes as content standards now. So when we are developing our content standards, we consider the content, the context, and the hacks and verbs in that broader content standard that we are putting together. So when we are breaking down into, you would know from CDD, if you are working with them, you would know it's knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Yeah. But we, for the first time, are introducing ASCA, attitudes, knowledge, skills, and the application of that. So in every filer, the module and the topics that we are writing, we are addressing the whole content. And that content, we understand it will be delivered to develop the child or the student in the class. So we are taking on a holistic approach, meaning we are breaking down our ASCA, or with CDD, you would know that it's KSAs. We are looking at the knowledge, the intellectual development of the child, and we're taking on the Bloom's approach. And thinking, remember, from recall to the evaluation and analysis, which is the top level of thinking, or critical thinking, which you are referring to. Then we also are addressing the child in the physical or the psychomotor domain of the child. And in that one, you will all understand from Bloom's that there are several levels. So we are writing based on the highest level. Because it's 11 and 12, we are parting them into tertiary institutions. We understand that. And of course, we're moving on to the spiritual or social aspect of it and the emotional aspect of it. So our curriculum content is, the core of it is addressing the whole child in the content we are designing and mapping out. And that is taken step by step in the topics, modules, and the filers in each filer. So that's the arrangement we are taking. But thank you for the positive comment on the action verbs we are using, because we are very careful in choosing not to use understanding and know and all this, because this will not give that teacher any clarity as to how they can teach the content we are delivering in the syllabus. Thank you.
Yeah, and look, we're very cognizant that this is a process. It's a process in development, and all we're looking at the moment is one point in time of that development. So that's why we framed the review around questions and some recommendations, because then the questions you know, they're reflective questions. You can say, yeah, we're onto that already. Just like you said to me now, we're onto that already. Don't worry about it. We're onto it already. So we're not making a judgment about it. We're just saying these would be things to reflect upon, which obviously you have done. So we understand this is an iterative and cyclical process that you're going through in this development. So thank you. Are there any other questions about just learning outcomes? Actually, at this point. Right, trick on about our assessment. So just to link back to the previous element, the sharper the learning outcomes, the easier it is to design assessment to determine student learning, particularly if you have the standard and condition, and you have spoken to me around, you're really trying to think about those standards and how they come to life through this curriculum. And obviously, just general comments, ideally assessment should be ongoing, authentic, well-designed and clear success criteria. Those are just general comments around assessment. So some of the things we've seen, just top level comments across the curriculum as we viewed it. There are excellent, authentic, formative assessment opportunities in the learning activities. You have got so many opportunities for formative assessment there. That's one of the great things about problem-based learning, is that you have great opportunities for formative assessment. So I know in individual subjects, there's been some feedback, which you'll get in the written feedback about, for example, whole class discussions or small group discussions are great opportunities for formative or observational assessment. One of the things about the summative assessment tasks as they sit now, we appreciate that these are all in development still, we appreciate that, is that there are some summative assessment task suggestions included, but the condition of the assessment is not always clear, like the example that I gave before, which is, you know, like how is somebody going to give an explanation? So what's the condition? Is it a written one? What is the standard, etc.? Are there opportunities for examinations? And there's that summative assessment. But really, you know, there are great opportunities for formative assessment that you go through, not just summative assessment. So some of the recommendations just from the materials we've seen so far, we do acknowledge that these are all still in development, but guidance for formative assessment throughout the semester could be provided in the teacher guides, just focusing teachers' attention on those opportunities for formative assessment. And I think when you get to this point of more detail around the summative assessments, it would be helpful to have rubrics and marking guides and maybe worked examples. So I'm sure that that would have been on your screen anyway, or in your mind anyway, but these are great things to think about when it comes to the summative assessments. And maybe a consideration is to think how assessment, as well as a topic or theme, could be used to integrate your STEM strands and subjects. So is there an opportunity here to have an assessment that's very integrated rather than separate to the discipline area? So is there an opportunity? You think there possibly is, particularly in problem-based learning and authentic context, to use assessment as an integrating device for STEM? So that would be a recommendation to think about. So I just stop there and see if there are any questions or comments around that.
No, I think, as you've just said, the way the STEM curriculum is developed with these themes, these overarching themes, as Pauline said, gives a real opportunity for assessment from an integrated perspective. So having those summative assessment tasks or even formative assessment tasks that consolidate the understanding across disciplines. I think that's a really great opportunity and a real value in the way that these themes provide a common context across the different strands of the curricula. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity.
So comments from our colleagues in Papua New Guinea? We've got any comments or questions?
One comment again here.
Okay. Well, I will be touching a little bit on your recommendations. Second point. In our system, we are trying with STEM education for the first time to set as curriculum standards.
Yeah.
So when we have mapped our set standards in the curriculum we are writing, then we are able to write assessments to measure those standards progressively through the grade levels. If we have started below, or now that we have started from the 11 and 12 down, we could bring that down to the lower levels to see that we have at least set standards in the curriculum and make that as our national curriculum standards for the country. Yeah. On the assessment aspect of it, from ACER, if they can give us an input, if there are any templates you use or any other information that you can guide us to set our assessment standards on write our national large-scale assessments to measure our curriculum standards progressively, either from the top down or from the bottom up. Is there any way ACER could come in to guide us on that with our STEM curriculum, STEM assessment?
Thank you for that. And again, we appreciate you're doing so many things at once, you know, and this opportunity that the curriculum writing is provided to shape not only the year 11 and 12 STEM curriculum, but really drive changes in practice, as you say, across all levels of schooling. So one of the things we will include in the, I've written in my notes here, in the written report, is we will include some material and support for your curriculum standards and for assessment. So I know that Celia in particular would have been working on curriculum standards with ACER. That was part of what she was doing as her day-to-day work relatively recently. So I will strongly draw on Celia's expertise there to be looking at the kind of templates and processes. I know there's quite a lot of documentation that's available to help with those processes. So we'll make sure, and I think Rob Randall spoke to you in the first workshop that you had, and Rob is a good colleague of ours now at ACER. He works for us at ACER, and Rob did head up the Australian Curriculum and Assessment Reporting Authority. So Celia, I'll just be picking your brains a little bit, and I will be picking Rob's brains a little bit, just to be able to put some, along with the review, to put some support documentation and things like that for you. That would be, certainly we can do that. That would be great. So any other comment or ideas around that?
One from our room, 1 second.
Yes, in regards to one of the recommendations for summative assessment, I believe towards the end of our teacher's guide, we have, in terms of planning, recording, and reporting of the assessment, we have outlined the templates for, in regards to the assessment methods that are being utilized or used in there. So we have for laboratory reports or tests or other assessments projects that are delivered, we have the assessment guidelines that are inserted there. I think that's one of my comments in regards to the recommendations.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, we all know that if we can provide some examples, and sometimes we can't provide those examples until we've actually implemented the curriculum. There are additional resources that you'll be adding to this, is worked examples, you know, and ideas and around how that might look. It would be helpful. Yeah, terrific. Okie doke. Mindful of time, so I'm just going to go to slides. Sorry, let me just go here. So in terms of the learning activities, so just the top level comments around the learning activities across subjects. We can see that the learning activities are very detailed. They draw on whole class and small group work. They're very consistent with student-centered learning. So again, that's a great thing to see as it aligns with the ambitions of and aims of the curriculum. One thing we did notice is that specificity relating to problem-based learning probably needs expanding a little bit, certainly in terms of perhaps the teacher guides. This is a big change. It is about teacher capacity, I suppose, in thinking about problem-based learning. So this is just a comment that you might want to think about more specificity, particularly in your teacher guides around problem-based learning. In our recommendations, we're thinking about that it would be useful to point teachers and guide teachers as to how group work can be used as a mechanism for inclusion, but also for that idea even around assessment and engagement around a small group work there. And we also thought it was probably would be very beneficial to look at examples and work solutions to particular problems. And again, we recognise that this is a curriculum in development, but these are things that you could be thinking about as you're developing your curriculum as you go forward. So this isn't a judgment of the curriculum as is. These are recommendations as you move forward of the things that we think might strengthen your teacher guides and the curriculum, student resources, etc. So again, with that one, I just want to, are there any questions around any of that, or comments, things that you'd like us to think about in our written report back to you, or how we might support you?
None from our room. We're good.
Do we have any from the room where Junior is?
Any comments, feedbacks? No, nothing from us.
Fantastic. And do I have any final comments from my ACER colleagues? Would they like to jump in about any of those things more generally?
I think just to reiterate what the recommendation around providing examples within the teacher guides is a way to alleviate that pressure on teachers to develop their own units of work, perhaps not to take the onus away from them, but to provide a really clear example or examples of what it can look like in a classroom context, effective pedagogical practices that they might be able to incorporate depending on their classroom environment, and the associated materials that are connected with that. So things like the assessment tasks, to provide a really clear guide for teachers to know how the content and the cognitive skills that are addressed in the curriculum can be implemented in a classroom context.
Thanks, Celia. Sharon, do you have any comments?
No, I think actually I am agreeing with you guys 100%. So I'm going to keep it short and just say, yeah, I'm fully in support of what you're saying here.
Thank you, Sharon. And Christy?
I was just going to briefly mention that in terms of the work solutions. I've noticed that some subjects do have work solutions and some don't. And I'm just reflecting on one of the comments from one of the PNG colleagues earlier, that some teachers are going to come into this and their content knowledge is going to be fantastic. And they're not going to need work solutions to the problems. They're going to know what to do. And then others are going to be learning as they teach when it comes to the content knowledge. So I think having those work solutions where possible is going to be very beneficial to those teachers, and it's going to help make their lives a lot easier. So I'd highly recommend, especially in the physics one, if we're going to talk about problems, instead of telling them to solve a problem around X, say solve a problem around X, here is an example, write out an example question, write out an example solution. And I know they're only drafts, but I think for physics especially, that's going to be needed.
Yeah. And certainly that's been our experience with the Myanmar curriculum, is really trying to support teachers. Because this is a big change, it's a pedagogical change, all of those sort of things, to actually see what some of those examples look like would be very helpful and supportive. So
one comment from this side of the room.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking us through the syllabus outline itself by taking through the content, the syllabus outline itself, then the content allows assessment, and the learning activities is what we are discussing now. So if you look at it, our documents are in 4. We have the syllabus document, then the teacher guide, then the teacher resource book, and the student resource book. So what we are trying to do is we are getting the syllabus written up, and then we guiding the teacher in the teacher resource book, and then we are giving the resourcing our teacher with the teacher resource book, and we are also providing solutions for the students in the student resource book. So how do you find that to be helpful, or is it any way we can do it better from your experiences across the other countries that you are helping?
I think the way in which you're approaching it is very effective, and it's very effective. So there's a commendation there about the way in which you're approaching it is really effective. I guess it's just, and we understand that all of these elements are being developed at the same time. So again, they're iterative. You're adding the detail to that. So we recognise that this is early on in the process of curriculum writing. Christy and Celia, along with our bigger team, we've been involved in writing a curriculum quite intensively now for a year, and we really understand how we have to keep on adding to those various different elements and refining. So we do understand that work. So I guess from our point of view is don't change anything that you're doing. You're doing a great job. Your ideas, there are great ideas that you're doing. We think that's really you're doing that really, really well. Where we're making recommendations is just when we're having a look at what's available to us to review just now, is just to make sure that those things are very, very high in your consciousness as you're moving forward. And as Christy has said, there are some worked examples where people have been able to do that, but that would be a great thing to have as consistency across all your different subjects in that area. That's the point that we would be making. So, look, I'm mindful of time now, and we're going over our other time thing. We would just like to say thank you. You're doing a wonderful job. This is a hugely ambitious curriculum. It's exciting. Our colleagues at ACER, they are very excited about seeing a curriculum, another STEM curriculum come to life in a different context with different ways of working. So we hope that that's been useful for you. We will write our report, our written review back to you, incorporating some of those emphases that we think will be helpful for you. And please, I know that our colleagues in Melbourne will broker. If you need more support from us, then we'll be able to provide more. We want this relationship to be ongoing, I guess, around this development. But thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Just keep on doing it. That's wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. And I just particularly want to thank my ACR colleagues who could make the time today. It's a very busy time of year for us for various different reasons. So thank you for coming along and being engaged in that work. Christy, Celia, Sharon, thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. It's Aaron here. Thank you very much for your and the team's response to the curriculum. We look forward to receiving the written report with that we can share with the STEM curriculum writing team here in Port Moresby and the National Department of Education. I'll hand over to Dr. Clement Winey now, who's the leader of the PNG STEM curriculum writing team, just to provide some remarks.
Right, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Pauline and Kristen and other teams from Asia for getting us through this session. It's good to hear at least your view of what we've done over the last 6 months. As you know, this is like we're doing it on a fly, so it has to be delivered fresh, baked out of the oven, and delivered to the classrooms on the first day of the term. So, and when the term starts, so it's been a great experience for us, for some of us who are non-curriculum developers. We just have to come in and help and try to get these things delivered. But I'm glad that at least you've gone through the first sort of the second term syllabus and and able to provide some inputs there, which are very helpful and very useful. I'm glad that we're able to establish this dialogue and this discussion, and we hope to have this dialogue continue on into the year and maybe next year as well, just to help to get this finalized and delivered, and hopefully continue to build the same curriculum down to grade 1 or grade 7 to 10. This review is very, it comes at a crucial time for us now, because we are also reviewing our own in-house work and activities, as well as trying to incorporate the comments that came in from the schools that have implemented the first term and then the second term documents that went out, the syllabus and the curriculum that went out. We'll be taking some of the comments that you just made on board with our review this week. It's going to start in our office tomorrow and Wednesday, and then we'll then recast all of those things again. As you said, it's an iterative process. We have to do it quickly because this thing is now alive and it's moving. So we have to make sure that we capture all the challenges that the teachers and the students are facing at the school level, and then incorporating them into the changes. As you will appreciate, we've taken a completely different sort of very ambitious, adventurous approach to deliver STEM in a setting that hopefully will position us correctly as a nation to look at the future that's emerging ahead of us. I believe that there is a partnership that needs to be developed, and that's been ongoing, but I think in terms of STEM and going forward within Australia and PNG, and that's the angle that we are trying to cast this curriculum towards. So we've had several discussions with Aaron along those lines and views of thinking, and I'm pretty sure that this discussion will be ongoing in the coming months and years, just to recast and reshape this the destiny of our country. I look at it as a game changer for PNG, as a disruptive intervention that is necessary to reposition the country in terms of its role and support towards Australia and towards the Pacific and the rest of the region. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clement. And just to close the session today, I'd like to invite Benny Rayapan, who's the Director of National Schools of Excellence from the National Department of Education, to provide a final closing remarks for this morning's session.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, team. And I really appreciate on behalf of the Department of Education. We have only few of us here. We are supposed to have a whole team up here to learn the whole thing. Since it's very new, this STEM is very new for us. We have been receiving lots of help from the team here, Australia Awards. And this is the first time that we are getting this team to help the curriculum writers. And we really appreciate and thank you for all your time and your input. I really wanted, as a director for secondary education, these things to happen prior to 6 months, writing the whole thing. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but at least it's happening now in the middle. I hope our Dr. Clement Vine and the team can take all those findings and recommendations into consideration for the next level. We can realign the term 1 and term 2 later. It's true, this curriculum is very challenging. It's written for only the fast learners. The year 11 and 12, we didn't think of the slow learners, the average learners. We wanted this curriculum to be only exclusively for the fast learners. But we also didn't have the prior knowledge of the students. So we have to look into that, how we go down the path to year 7, 8, 9, and 10, so that we can filter those students to come. So hopefully our STEM can trickle down and align the standard, and hopefully it will help us, as you suggested here. I'm very much interested and happy to know the findings and recommendations. I'll report back to our team at the education department. They will be very happy, and it's really a good support, as I see. We originally thought of only syllabus, but later Dr. Clement and the team came to help us with the other 3 documents. We thought it's only an outline and the syllabus. And now they've given us the teacher guide and teacher resource book and student resource book. So 4 documents are coming to us along the way. You must have seen them. One request from my side, I know you said there are some written assessment is coming on, the review coming. Some of you really mentioned about the biology, chemistry, and physics. And if I would like to have some input on the technology subjects like engineering and the mathematics, because we don't know what our standard is right now, whether that contents are okay. It's true the contents are too extensive and large. The time is limited, but we went back to school to see what we can do. We can extend an hour extra learning. If we have 50 minutes period in a week, we want to make it 6 periods in a week so that they can cover those lessons. Because the students whom we select in year 11 and 12 are high academic achievers in grade 10. And that's why we are looking at it. So thank you, Dr. Kathy, for organizing this from your end in the cold mountain place there. Think of us all the time. And the team around Australia, we really thank you for your input. We're looking forward to see more of your interaction and dialogue. Hopefully we'll strengthen our team here. And when we put together all of them by the end of the year, year 11 curriculum, we are happy that somebody has already seen these, and it's domestically and internationally. Hopefully our students can get challenged around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rayapan, and thanks for those remarks and summarising the next steps and the work that we will be working with you over the next coming months. And we hope, as we've discussed before, that the PNGAus Partnership Secondary Schools initiative is in a transition phase from its first iteration into its second, and we're in the process of redesigning that at the moment. And we hope that as part of that, the next phase, we will be able to continue the support to the National Department of Education with its STEM curriculum moving forward. And we should have a clearer picture about that in August. So that will work, I think, well for the November reflections that you'll have at the end of the year for the curriculum that you've delivered for the Year 11s here in Papua New Guinea. Thank you again for the ACER team and the AF in Melbourne and I think Cairns and other places around Australia. We look forward to receiving the report so that the team can utilise that as part of their reflections in the coming days, and we'll be in touch. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.